Hello students! This lesson provides a basic overview of chemical safety. Hopefully it will help you better understand chemicals so you can use them safely and limit your risks. Many chemicals may, especially if not properly used, endanger our health and poison our environment. Chemicals are present in every home and in every workplace. How can you tell if the chemical you are working with is hazardous? How can you reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals? Hazard refers to the properties of a chemical substance that make it capable of causing harm to a person or the environment. Here is a list of hazards. Do you know their symbols? How to control these chemical hazards? Let's look at some school laboratory chemical safety. All laboratory work with chemicals must be conducted in a safe manner. Wear the appropriate personal protective equipment, chemical splash goggles, long-sleeved laboratory coat or chemical-resistant apron. Secure loose clothing, tie long hair back. Wear disposable gloves when handling hazardous materials. Wash hands after removing gloves and before leaving the laboratory. Always perform the experiments precisely as directed. If the safety information says that a chemical should only be used inside a fume hood, then don't use it anywhere else. Always keep your working area clean. Chemicals are used in the home every day. They include cleaning products, paints and paint thinners, glues, oils, pesticides and medicines. Those chemicals can be dangerous to your health and the environment. How do you attain chemical safety at home? The first safety procedure is to always read the warning label. Before you buy a product, read the label. Before you use a product, read the label. The label shows hazard pictograms and hazard statements. They tell you how the product can harm you. Precautionary statements give advice about the correct handling of the product. Be sure to understand and follow the instructions. What it says on how to use the substance safely, how to protect yourself when using it, and how to properly store it. If possible, keep all chemicals in their original containers. Never use food containers for chemical storage. So, do not take the chemical out of its vessel and place it in something else, such as an empty soft drink bottle. Also, do not store hazardous chemicals even near food products. Are you familiar with the chemical risks at your workplace? Chemical safety is based on knowing what chemicals are used in the workplace and what their properties are. To do this, you'll need the safety data sheets, käyttöturvallisuustiedotteet. Chemical manufacturers are required by law to develop a safety data sheet for every chemical that is made. Safety data sheets are distributed when selling a chemical to professional and industrial users. In Finland, safety data sheets must be delivered in Finnish and/or Swedish. An employer has a responsibility to communicate the presence of hazardous materials in the workplace and how workers should handle them. An employer must maintain safety data sheets and make them available to employees electronically or by paper. Safety data sheets are intended both for those responsible for safety and for all the workers who handle the chemicals, so that they are familiar with the chemical risks at their workplace and can prepare on how to use and store the chemical appropriately. Always read the safety data sheets for all of the materials you work with. When you know exactly what you are dealing with, you can develop safe work methods and store the chemicals safely away from anything that might cause a reaction. Air quality can quickly become compromised in workplaces, making ventilation an important factor in minimizing exposure. The purpose of occupational exposure limits values is to minimize the risk of health effects at work. Chemical safety data sheets must report exposure limit values if such have been set. In Finland, the binding limit values for concentrations of pollutants in workplace air are set at EU level. For the indicative values, the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health confirms a list of concentrations of impurities in workplace air known to be harmful. Haitalliseksi tunnetut pitoisuudet. Also known as HTP values, HTP-arvot. HTP values are given as the time-weighted average for 8-hour workday. In addition, a 15 minutes value is set as short-term exposure limit. Employers must take the HTP values into account when assessing the quality of workplace air and planning the work environment. The HTP values publication is freely available online. Getting to know the labels on chemical products will help protect you from harm. Chemicals that cause rapid corrosion, syöpyminen, of skin and metals are marked by this hazard pictogram in the globally harmonized system of chemical labels. Corrosion on living tissue is typically caused by acid-base reactions. We are already familiar with the pH. Remember, a pH of 7 is neutral. Anything above that is basic, and anything below that is acidic. But do you know which pH values are corrosive, syövyttäviä? Chemicals with extreme pH values are corrosive. A corrosive chemical has a pH of 2 or lower, or a pH of 11.5 or higher. The more acidic or more basic a substance is, the more effective it will be as a corrosive substance. Common corrosives are either strong acids, strong bases, or concentrated solutions of certain weak acids or weak bases. They do damages to tissues. In addition to acids and bases, there are some other substances that are considered as corrosive chemicals, but we will not discuss them now. Corrosive substances cause destruction of living cells and tissue by chemical action at the point of contact. So, they react with the compounds in our tissue, chemically breaking up tissue, causing chemical burns. They begin to cause damage as soon as they touch the skin, eyes, respiratory tract, or digestive tract. A solution with a high number of hydrogen ions is acidic and has a low pH value. These hydrogen ions disrupt the proteins and lipids in our body. Burns from acids tend to be felt right away. A solution with a high number of hydroxide ions is basic and has a high pH value. Bases are corrosive because they break down fatty acids in tissue. Chemical burns from bases do not cause as much pain as acid burns, but the damage can be more extensive because bases penetrate deeply and exposure is not always detected quickly. When a base comes in contact with your skin, you may feel a slippery sensation before a feeling of burning on the skin is experienced. When the burning sensation starts, the damage is already done. Corrosive chemicals are very harmful to the skin, and skin injuries may be very slow to heal. Gloves, käsineet, must be worn whenever you are handling corrosive chemicals. Tin disposable nitrile gloves are the most common gloves used when handling chemicals. However, it is important to remember that they provide only limited short-term splash protection. Nitrile has poor resistance to concentrated acids. There are no gloves that are universally protective against all chemicals. Gloves made of different materials might or might not provide a barrier to certain chemicals. Each glove manufacturer provides a glove compatibility chart that you should use to check with the chemicals you will use. The safety data sheet supplied with the corrosive you are using should advise on selection of chemical protective gloves. Choose a glove that meets the European standard EN 374. They have a pictogram of conical flask with code letters for test chemicals. The codes inform the wearer about what chemicals the gloves are designed for use with and for how long. Check the codes to make sure the glove material you choose protects against all the substances being handled. Most workplace injuries caused by acids and bases result from accidental skin or eye contact. Skin or eye contact can readily occur from splashes, and their effect on human tissue generally takes place very rapidly. The first aid for these injuries usually involves flooding the contaminated area with large amounts of water. The sooner the flushing starts, the better the chances are for eye and skin recovery. Safety showers, hätäsuihkut, should be present wherever accidental exposure to corrosives might occur. When you start a new job where you handle chemicals, take notice of location signs for safety showers. Learn the location and how to operate the nearest safety shower. Basic first aid for any chemical splash is to flush contaminated skin with water for at least 15 minutes, but corrosive chemicals require longer flushing times. Flushing should continue 30 minutes for most corrosives and 60 minutes for strong bases like sodium hydroxide. Remove any contaminated clothing after turning the shower on. After showering, seek medical attention. Corrosive chemicals are incredibly dangerous to eyesight. If corrosives come into contact with the eyes, they can cause severe irritation, scarring, or blindness. A single drop of strong corrosive material can cause blindness within seconds. When handling corrosive substances, wear industrial safety goggles. Safety glasses should enclose the entire eye area. It should also have side shields. Eye washes, silmäsuihkut, must be readily available in areas where corrosive chemicals are used and stored. In the event of eye contact with a corrosive chemical, the affected area should be immediately flushed with water for 30 minutes. Hold the eyelids open in the flow of water and seek medical attention immediately after flushing for the required time. Corrosive effects can occur not only to the skin and eyes, but also to the respiratory tract through inhalation. Breathing in corrosive vapors or particles can irritate and burn the mouth, lining of the nose, throat, windpipe and lungs, as well as cause coughing and breathing problems. Well-designed and well-maintained ventilation systems should remove corrosive vapors and dust from the workplace. Laboratory workers work with corrosive acids and bases under the fume hood, vetokaapissa. When you dilute an acid or base to make a lower concentration, what do? Do you add water to acid or base? Acids and bases, both liquid and solid, generate large amounts of heat when dissolved in water. This can cause the solution to boil or even to erupt violently from the container. So, if a job requires mixing corrosives with water, always add acid or bases to water and not the reverse. Add corrosive to water slowly in small amounts. Allow the acid or base to run down the side of a container and mix slowly to avoid violent reactions and splattering. Always use cold water. Cooling may also be necessary. Substances with a hazard of acute toxicity, välitön myrkyllisyys, will have this pictogram on their chemical label. The skull and crossbones is a common symbol for toxicity, myrkyllisyys. Acute, välitön, means that exposure to a poison on one occasion or during a short period of time may be toxic or even fatal. How would you answer this question? What makes a poison a poison? Mikä tekee myrkystä myrkyn? Toxicology is the study of harmful effects of poisons on people and other living organisms. Nearly 500 years ago, Swiss physician and chemist Paracelsus, who is called the father of toxicology, stated that solely the dose determines that a thing is not a poison. In other words, the amount of a substance a person is exposed to is as important as the nature of the substance. Even essential nutrients can be poisonous if taken to excess. The effects of poisoning depend on the substance, amount, and type of contact. There are several ways one could be exposed to poison. One could breathe it in, swallow it, or absorb it through one's skin. A person's weight, age, and state of health also affects symptoms. The amount of a substance that enters or contacts a person is called a dose, annos, An important consideration in evaluating a dose is body weight. If a child is exposed to the same amount of chemical as an adult, the child who weighs less can be affected more than the adult. Many toxicity tests are done on small laboratory animals. Animal tests are often good indicators of chemical toxicity in humans, even though animals may not react exactly like people. LD50 figures are frequently used as an indicator of a substance's acute toxicity. The term LD50 signifies that about 50% of the animals given the specified dose by mouth will die. It is usually expressed as the amount of chemical administered per kilogram of the body weight of the test animal. In general, the smaller the LD50 value, the more toxic the chemical is. The larger the LD50 value, the lower the toxicity.
If someone has swallowed poison, remove the substance with your fingers if the poison is a solid. If the poison is a liquid, clean out a child's mouth with a washcloth or an adult's mouth with water, but get them to spit it out, not swallow. Do not attempt to dilute the poison by giving something to drink unless you are specifically told to do so by a medical professional. Do not try to make a person vomit. If vomiting occurs, keep head lower than hips to help prevent aspiration. Aspiration means the entry of a chemical into the respiratory system. Medicinal charcoal, lääkehiili, also known as activated charcoal, aktiivihiili, is commonly taken by mouth to treat poisonings that occurred by mouth. It stops toxins from being absorbed in the stomach by binding to them. To be effective, it must be used within a short time of the poisoning occurring. Activated charcoal cannot treat alcohol poisoning. It should not be used in poisoning if corrosive agents, such as bases and acids, or petroleum products, for example fuel oil or gasoline, have been swallowed. Before using medicinal charcoal, call the Poison Information Center for advice. When medical advice is needed, have product container or label at hand.
The serious health hazard pictogram is sometimes called the chronic health hazard pictogram. Chronic effects occur over a long period of time. A chemical in the workplace at allowable levels may not immediately provoke bad responses from the workers. Chronic effects due to exposure to some chemicals have been experienced among workers a long time after they were exposed to them.
The serious health hazard pictogram indicates a product contains chemicals that may cause long-term health effects in humans, including cancer, gene mutation, reproductive health effects, respiratory sensitivity, and organ toxicity. An explicit description of the effect is given on a safety data sheet.
Some consumer products present a risk of aspiration aiheuttavat henkeämytämisen vaaraa. They are, for example, kerosene, lamp oil, gasoline, and mineral oils. These have a very low viscosity, which means that they are very thin. If you drink these products, some would likely slip down your windpipe and into your lungs rather than going down your food pipe and into your stomach. Aspiration of a substance can also occur as it is vomited following ingestion. Children are particularly susceptible to health effects if they drink or breathe these hazardous products. Aspiration can cause chemical pneumonitis, which is inflammation of the lung.
Cancer-causing substances are known as carcinogens, carcinogenit. Cancer, syöpä, can be caused by a number of things, including exposure to carcinogenic substances, ultraviolet sunlight, and ionizing radiation. Chemical carcinogens may be natural or synthetic, toxic or non-toxic. Some of them may lead to cancer after only a very small exposure, while others might require intense exposure over many years. So, coming into contact with a carcinogen does not mean you will get cancer. It depends on what you were exposed to, how often you were exposed, and how much you were exposed to, and so on. Cancer is an example of a delayed health effect. It may not appear until 5 to 40 years after exposure. That's why determining the cause of cancer is difficult.
The International Agency for Research on Cancer is part of the World Health Organization of the United Nations. One of its major goals is to identify causes of cancer. It has devised a system of categories to evaluate the carcinogenicity of an agent to humans. An agent is classified based on scientific evidence. The list of categories and their definition are shown here. The list describes the level of evidence that something can cause cancer, not how much it might raise your risk. For example, there is strong evidence that both tobacco smoking and eating processed meat can cause cancer, so both are listed as carcinogenic to humans. But smoking is much more likely to cause cancer than eating processed meat, even though both are in the same category. Some carcinogens may raise cancer risk after only a very small exposure. Others might require intense exposure. For example, heavy alcohol use is linked with an increased risk of several types of cancer, but an occasional glass of wine will have much less impact on cancer risk. Even if exposure is known to cause cancer, this doesn't necessarily mean that it should be avoided at all costs. For example, sunlight is a major source of ultraviolet rays, which are a known cause of skin cancer. But sunlight also has benefits, such as helping the body make vitamin D. Completely avoiding sunlight is not recommended. Exposure to asbestos, asbesti, has been linked to lung cancer and mesothelioma, that is cancer of the chest and abdomen. In Finland, asbestos was used in building materials from the 1920s until 1994, when asbestos-containing materials were banned. Demolition work may still pose health risks if workers are not protected in accordance with guidelines. The removal of asbestos in buildings is subject to license. The asbestos demolition workers must be trained and must use efficient protective devices in their work. Hexavalent chromium is one of the valence states of the element chromium. When inhaled, hexavalent chromium compounds are respiratory tract irritants. They are also known to cause cancer. A major source of worker exposure to hexavalent chromium occurs during hot work, such as welding on stainless steel and other alloy steels containing chromium metal.
Benzene, is present in crude oil and is partially responsible for the characteristic petroleum odor around gasoline stations. Benzene is also a natural part of tobacco smoke. The major sources of benzene exposure are cigarette smoke, car service stations, and exhaust from motor vehicles. Benzene levels in rooms containing tobacco smoke can be many times higher than normal. Rates of leukemia, which is a cancer of the blood-forming cells, have been found to be higher among workers exposed to high levels of benzene, such as those in the chemical and oil refining industries.
Petrol or gasoline, benzene, is a complex mixture of hydrocarbons. People use it primarily to fuel vehicles and machines. Limited contact with gasoline is usually harmless. Most people only come into contact with gasoline vapors at the service station or while using their lawnmower. People who work with machinery have a higher risk of health problems because they have daily exposure to gasoline. Chronic or severe exposure to fuel products can cause severe chronic health complications. If swallowed, petrol can enter lungs and cause hydrocarbon pneumonitis. This can easily happen if you try to siphon gasoline out of a tank with a hose and your mouth. Never do that. Entry into the lungs may also follow inhalation of petrol-contaminated vomit. If a person swallows gasoline, inducing vomiting does not help but can make it much worse. Hazardous products with this exclamation mark pictogram can cause certain health effects. Terveyshaittoja. You are routinely exposed to a wide range of these harmful chemicals used in cleaning and maintenance in home, school and workplace.
The exclamation mark pictogram is used for a number of very different health hazards. In addition to this pictogram, the label contains a hazard statement, which is an explanation of what it means. For example, the symbol might mean that the chemical may cause irritation, aiheuttaa ärsytystä, skin irritation, ihoärsytystä, or eye irritation, silmäärsytystä, or respiratory tract irritation, hengitysteiden ärsytystä.
Sensitization, herkistyminen, is a specific form of immunization. Such overreactivity is called allergy, allergia. Skin sensitization, ihon herkistyminen, is an allergic type skin response. Chemical allergy in skin usually develops over time. Often an individual does not show any symptoms after the first exposure, but with subsequent exposures the skin reacts. Symptoms include dryness, redness and itching of the skin. The skin may become swollen, cracked and thickened, and blisters may develop. Skin sensitization is one of the most frequently encountered hazards in the workplace. If sensitized, workers may be required to avoid being exposed again. This forces many workers to change jobs. Make sure that, for example, cleaning fluids are diluted to the correct strength. If they are over strength, they are more likely to cause skin sensitization. Remember to change clothing and gloves frequently, as chemicals can accumulate on and penetrate through them.
Household chemical products are among the top products responsible for injuries in small children. Store all hazardous chemicals out of the reach of children and pets. Keep these on a high shelf, but store breakable containers, particularly of corrosives, below your shoulder height. Use safety locks and guard rails on shelves. Do not store chemicals under sinks, as they may leak and some chemicals react when wet.
Any kind of detergent can be harmful, but the chemicals in laundry detergent packets are especially concentrated and thus pose a greater health risk. The colorful packets can look like candy to a young child. A young child can grab a packet and put it in their mouth when you turn your back for a second. Children who swallow those have had serious health problems. It might be best to use traditional liquid or powder detergent products instead of packets if there are young children around or adults with dementia or developmental disabilities. The Hazardous to the Environment pictogram shows a tree with no leaves and a dead fish to represent harm to the environment. When possible, avoid buying products that use this pictogram. Protect the environment by choosing products that cause less harm.
Environmentally hazardous substances, ympäristölle vaaralliset aineet, include substances that are toxic to organisms, persistent and bioaccumulating. Persistent substances remain in the environment. Bioaccumulating substances increase in concentration in living organisms as they take in contaminated air, water or food, because the substances are very slowly excreted. It is the bioaccumulation of substances within the organisms that give rise to toxic effects over longer time scales, even when actual environmental concentrations are low. When other organisms eat smaller organisms, the substance's concentration increases progressively as it moves up a food chain. This is called biomagnification. Some harmful substances reach bodies of water through purified wastewater, as wastewater treatment plants are not designed to remove these chemicals. Do not flush unneeded chemicals down the drain. Always take hazardous waste to a proper collection point.